MPS tormented the shy girl, utter regret. 7 days later, she made them crawl and pray for mercy. 17-year-old Gwendolyn Abernathy had mastered the trick of being unseen. Barely 4'11" with a petite build, medium-length light brown hair that she always wore in a messy braid, and clothes carefully picked from discount shops to draw zero eyes. She drifted through the halls of Crestwood Academy like vapor. Her folks had relocated to this sleepy Maine village 4 months back when her mom secured work at the nearby mill, and Gwen had made it her purpose to fade into the woodwork till the end of term. What her new schoolmates didn't realize was that Gwen had devoted the past 9 years to studying Aikido and Judo at her aunt's dojo back in Chicago. She was a 4-time regional winner in her weight bracket and had sparred with fighters twice her size since age 11. Her aunt, a retired MMA fighter, had taught her that real power came from composure and focus, not from starting trouble. When her family moved to Maine, her parents had pleaded with her to forget that life and just try being a normal teenager. "Honey, please," her dad had said, his eyes glistening. "We've seen what that world can do to folks. Your aunt's aches, the brutality. We just want you to have a calm life here. Can you try to be just a regular girl for once?" Gwen had agreed, partially because she was sick of being labeled as the fighter, and partially because she truly longed to know what a normal teenage life was like. She stored away her uniform, stopped talking about practice, and promised to keep her skills totally hidden. The scent of the old canvas bag still lingered. Troubles began during her 3rd week at Crestwood Academy. The school was typical small-town America, grey stone buildings, dry lawns, and that weird mix of groups that seemed to exist everywhere. Gwen quickly saw the social order: the trendy kids who ran the lunchroom, the jocks who lived at the gymnasium, the brainy kids who took over the library, and everyone else who just tried to get by. Sadly, she also saw the tormentors. Chadwick "Chad" Thompson was the sort of guy who peaked in middle school and was trying hard to hold on to that moment for as long as he could. At 19, he was a senior who should have graduated last year, but had been kept back because of failing grades. He was short, narrow-shouldered, with the kind of conceited attitude that came from never being challenged. His 2 sidekicks were equally forgettable: Bradley "Brad" Smith, a skinny kid with a stutter who chuckled way too much at Chad's jokes, and Stanley "Stan" Johnson, a chubby boy who seemed to live only to make Chad feel important. Their first meeting happened on a Wednesday during lunch break. Gwen was sitting by herself at a corner table, eating a salad and reading a book quietly, when Chad's shadow covered her table. The smell of his cheap cologne filled the air. "Well, well, look what we have here," Chad said, sitting in the seat across from her without asking. Brad and Stan stood behind him like guards. "You're that new girl, right? The one from Illinois?" Gwen glanced up from her book, instantly spotting the nasty look in Chad's eyes. She'd seen it too many times, the look of someone who had found what they believed was an easy target. "I'm Gwen," she said softly, closing her book. "And yes, I'm from Chicago." "Chicago," Brad repeated in a mocking voice, his voice cracking. "Ooh, fancy. Bet you think you're better than us small-town people, huh?" "I don't think that at all," Gwen replied, her voice even. "I'm just trying to eat my salad." Chad leaned forward, his grin becoming mean. "You know, new girl, there's a kind of unspoken rule here at Crestwood. New students need to show a little respect to those of us who've been here longer. It's just how things are." Gwen felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always came before a fight. Every lesson her aunt had drilled into her was urging her to take control right away, to show these boys that she wasn't someone to mess with. But she had promised her parents, and more importantly, she genuinely wanted to try a different way. "I'm not looking for any problems," she said, starting to pack up her lunch. "I'll just eat somewhere else." "Oh, but we haven't finished talking yet," Stan said, putting his hand on her arm as she tried to stand. "See, that respect I mentioned? It's not just about attitude. There's a small, let's call it a welcome fee, $15 a week, and we make sure nobody bothers you. The demand was so ridiculous that Gwen almost laughed. These boys had no idea who they were trying to scare. She could have had all three of them helpless on the floor in under 40 seconds. Instead, she carefully took Stan's hand off her arm and stood up. "I need to think about it," she said, which meant absolutely not, but said in a way that might give her a little time. Sure, Chad said, his smile growing wider. "Take your time, but don't take too much time. We'll talk again tomorrow." That night, Gwen lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind working. She could handle these boys without any trouble, but that would mean showing her true self, and she wasn't ready to give up on her try at a normal teenage life just yet. Maybe she could find another way to deal with it. The next day, she had her answer ready when Chad and his friends stopped her again near the bike racks. The air smelled like gasoline. "I'm not going to pay you anything," she said calmly. "I'm not bothering anyone, and I'd like it if you'd leave me alone." The change in Chad's face was instant. The fake friendliness vanished, replaced by something cold and cruel. "That's disappointing, Illinois," he said. "I was really hoping we could be friends. But if you want to do this the hard way, that's fine with me too." What came next was a series of constant attacks that would have broken most people. Chad and his friends seemed to see Gwen's quiet refusal as a personal challenge, and they made it their goal to make her life at Crestwood Academy as awful as they could. It started small. They would accidentally bump into her in the halls, hard enough to make her books fall. They would sit behind her in classes and whisper insults just loud enough for her to hear, but not loud enough for the teachers to notice. They would knock her backpack off her shoulder as they walked by, spilling her stuff across the floor. The smell of old paper and pencils would fill the air. In the lunchroom, they made things worse. Brad would walk past her table and accidentally spill her drink, soaking her lunch and her notebooks. Stan would sit nearby and make loud comments about weird, quiet girls who think they're too good for everyone. Chad would plan it all with the skill of someone who had been bullying people for years, always making sure there were no teachers around to see the worst of it. The last straw came on a Friday afternoon. Gwen was walking to her scooter after school, looking forward to the weekend and hoping that maybe the boys would lose interest in her over the 2-day break. She was getting her keys out of her backpack when she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey, Illinois!" She turned to see Chad, Brad, and Stan coming closer, along with 2 other boys she didn't know. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a few students and no teachers anywhere in sight. The wind was picking up. "We need to have a talk," Chad said, his voice having a new edge that made Gwen's danger sense kick in. "You've been disrespecting us for weeks now, and it's starting to get embarrassing. People are going to think we're soft if we let some little Chicago girl walk all over us." "I haven't walked all over anyone," Gwen said, her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "I've just been trying to mind my own business." "That's the problem," Brad said, stepping closer. "Your business is our business now. See, when someone moves to our town, goes to our school, and then acts like they're too good to follow our rules, that becomes our problem." He nervously cracked his knuckles. One of the boys she didn't know, a short kid with greasy hair, spoke up. Maybe she needs a lesson in manners. Gwen's mind was working fast, figuring out the situation. 5 against 1, no one watching, no way to call for help. If this were a training situation, her aunt would have told her to end it quickly, take out the leader first, then deal with the others before they could work together to attack. But this wasn't training, this was real life. And she was still trying to be the normal girl her parents wanted her to be. "Look," she said, taking a step back toward her scooter, "I don't want any trouble. Maybe we can work something out." Chad's grin was cruel. "Oh, now you want to work something out? Too late for that, Illinois. You had your chance to do this the easy way." He nodded to the others, and they started to spread out, making a circle around her. Gwen felt her training take over automatically. She noticed each boy's position, their balance, their potential moves. Brad had his hands in his pockets, maybe carrying something. Stan was leaning on his right leg, probably an old injury. The two strangers were fidgety, probably not used to this kind of situation. "Here's what's going to happen," Chad went on, pulling out his phone. "We're going to have a little fun with you, and I'm going to film it. Then, unless you want this video showing up on every social media site in school, you're going to start showing us the respect we deserve, starting with $75 a week." The mention of filming made Gwen's blood turn cold. She had seen what happened to kids who became the victims of embarrassing videos, how it followed them always, ruined their lives, sometimes even made them want to hurt themselves. The idea of her parents seeing her humiliated like that was worse than any physical harm, but still she tried one more time to stop it. "Please," she said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "I'll pay you, just not here, not like this." "Too late," Chad said, holding up his phone. "The time for talking is over. Boys, help our new friend understand her place." The air grew heavy. Stan moved first, grabbing for her backpack. In that moment, as his hands touched her bag and Chad's phone started recording, something inside Gwen broke. All the weeks of being harassed, all the shame, all the fear and anger she had been holding back came rushing out. But more than that, she realized that her try at being normal had failed. These boys would never leave her alone, would never see her as anything other than a person to take advantage of. She had tried to be the person her parents wanted her to be, but sometimes the world doesn't let you pick who you are. "Let go of my bag," she said, her voice changing completely. Gone was the soft, unsure tone she'd been using for months. This voice was sharp, controlled, and completely sure of itself. Stan laughed and gripped tighter. "Or what, little girl? You gonna cry for your mommy?" What happened next shocked everyone's idea of who Gwendolyn Abernathy really was. In one smooth movement, Gwen grabbed Stan's wrist with both hands, stepped to the side, and used his own weight to throw him over her hip. He hit the ground hard, the air leaving his lungs in a loud gasp. Before anyone could react, she had turned toward Brad, who was reaching for something in his pocket. Her right hand shot out in a perfect palm strike, hitting him in the chest. Brad bent over, struggling to breathe, and Gwen quickly followed up with a kick to his leg. The crack of his bone was loud across the parking lot. The two unknown boys looked at each other in shock and quickly started backing away. "We're out of here, dude," one of them said, and they both turned and ran. The smell of fear filled the air. Chad stood still, his phone still recording, his mouth open in shock. In less than 15 seconds, his support had been removed or had run away, and the quiet girl from Chicago was standing over two of his friends like some kind of action movie star. "What the heck?" he managed to say. Gwen turned toward him, and Chad saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. This wasn't the scared, weak girl he had been tormenting for weeks. This was someone else completely, someone dangerous. The air seemed to crackle with energy. 9 years, she said, her voice strangely calm. 9 years of Aikido and Judo, 4-time regional champion in Illinois. I've been holding back for months because I wanted to try being normal, but you wouldn't let me. Chad's fight or flight response finally took over, but he chose poorly. Instead of running, he rushed toward her, thinking his size would be enough to beat her. Gwen stepped aside from his clumsy rush easily, grabbed his arm, and used a simple throw to send him crashing to the ground. Before he could get up, she had moved behind him and locked in a chokehold, her arm set perfectly across his throat. "I could knock you out right now," she whispered in his ear as he struggled weakly against her grip. "I could choke you until you're unconscious and leave you here on the ground. Is that what you want?" Chad's struggles became more desperate as he realized he couldn't break her hold. His vision was starting to blur and panic was setting in. He could feel the blood rushing to his head. "Please," he choked out. I can't breathe." Gwen held the choke for a few more seconds, letting Chad feel how helpless he was, then released him. He fell forward, coughing and gasping for air. The asphalt scraped against his skin. "Here's how this is going to work," Gwen said, standing over the three boys. Stan was still trying to catch his breath. Brad was holding his broken leg and crying, and Chad was clutching his throat. "You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave everyone else alone too. No more demanding money, no more harassment, no more bullying. You're crazy," Chad gasped. "No," Gwen replied calmly. "I'm trained, there's a difference. I know exactly how much force to use and when to stop. But if you or your friends ever bother me again, or if I see you picking on anyone else, I won't be so gentle next time." She picked up Chad's phone, which had been recording the whole thing, and deleted the video. Then she dropped the phone on the ground next to him. "Oh, and Chad," she said as she walked toward her scooter, "if you're thinking about trying to get revenge or telling people some made-up story about what happened here, remember that I know where you live, where you work, and where you hang out. I've been watching you guys for weeks. Don't test me." The ride home was strange. Gwen's hands were shaking a little from the adrenaline, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Freedom. The constant stress she had been carrying, the fear that had been following her through the halls of Crestwood Academy, was finally gone. The wind whipped through her hair. When she got home, her parents instantly knew something was different. There was a confidence in her walk, a calmness in her eyes that they hadn't seen since they'd moved to Maine. "How was school today, sweetie?" her mum asked carefully. "Better," Gwen said with a small smile. "Much better." That weekend, she unpacked her training gear for the first time since the move. On Monday morning, she walked into Crestwood Academy with her head held high, wearing clothes that fit her well instead of the baggy, shapeless clothes she had been hiding in. The change in the school's feeling was instant and huge. Word of what had happened in the parking lot had spread over the weekend, growing in the telling until Gwen had supposedly taken on half the wrestling team by herself. The truth was amazing enough, but high school stories had a way of growing bigger. Chad, Brad, and Stan were nowhere to be seen for the first few days of the week. When they finally came back, they were different people. Chad's swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him jump at sudden sounds. Brad wore a bandage across his obviously broken leg and avoided looking at anyone. Stan walked carefully, still feeling the effects of his meeting with the ground. But the biggest change was in how they treated other students. The casual bullying that had been their thing was gone. When they saw younger students being picked on by others, they actually stepped in to stop it. Word spread that Chad Thompson had become some kind of anti-bullying person, though no one could figure out why. The truth was simpler. They were scared of Gwen and what she might do if she saw them going back to their old ways. For her part, Gwen found herself in a strange spot. Students who had never talked to her before were suddenly wanting to be her friend. Teachers who had barely noticed her were now trying to get her involved in class. The popular kids were trying to get her to join their groups. But maybe the most important change came from the students who had been targets themselves. A quiet freshman named Daniel came up to her after lunch one day, his eyes wide with respect and thanks. "I heard what you did to Chad Thompson," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. He's been taking my lunch money since the start of the year, but he stopped after last week. Similar talks happened all week. Girl after girl, boy after boy, coming up to thank her for stopping their suffering." Gwen realized that Chad and his friends had been hurting far more students than she had known, and her actions had freed all of them. 3 weeks after the parking lot event, Chad Thompson did something no one at Crestwood Academy had ever expected. He apologized. It happened during lunch, in front of the whole lunchroom. Chad walked up to Gwen's table, where she was now sitting with a group of friends she had made since coming out of her shell, and cleared his throat nervously. The smell of the school lunches hung heavy in the air. "Gwen," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry. The lunchroom was totally silent. Students at nearby tables had stopped eating to stare at the never-before-seen sight of Chad Thompson, the school's former top bully, apologizing to the quiet girl from Chicago. "I accept your apology," Gwen said calmly. "But you shouldn't be apologizing just to me. You should be apologizing to everyone you've hurt." Chad nodded, his face red with shame and guilt. "You're right. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of person I was, and I don't like what I see. I'm going to try to be better." Over the next weeks, Chad kept his word. He joined the peer help program, started helping younger students, and became a supporter of anti-bullying programs. Brad and Stan followed his lead, and within a month, the group that had once made Crestwood Academy miserable had become unlikely heroes for the underdog. As for Gwen, she found the balance she had been looking for. She wasn't the invisible girl she had tried to be, but she also wasn't only known for her fighting skills. She joined the school's martial arts group, started teaching self-defense classes for students who were interested, and became a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Her parents were first worried when they learned what had happened, but they came to understand that their daughter had found a way to use her strength in a good way. She wasn't looking for fights, but she was no longer scared to stand up for herself or others when she needed to. On graduation day, as Gwen walked across the stage to get her diploma, she thought about the trip that had brought her to this moment. She had learned that sometimes you can't pick whether or not to be different. Sometimes the world makes that choice for you, but you can pick how to use your differences, whether to help or to hurt, whether to lift others up or tear them down. Chad Thompson graduated that day too, having made up his failed classes through summer school and community service. As they passed each other after the ceremony, he stopped and held out his hand. The sun beat down on the asphalt. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me who I was becoming and for giving me a chance to be better." Gwen shook his hand and smiled. "We all make mistakes, Chad. The important thing is learning from them." Years later, Gwen would become a martial arts teacher and youth advisor, helping troubled teens find good ways to use their anger and frustration. Chad would become a social worker, giving his life to helping young people avoid the mistakes he had made in high school. But in that moment, standing in the parking lot of Crestwood Academy with their diplomas in hand, they were just two teenagers who had learned one of life's most important lessons: that real strength isn't about controlling others, but about protecting them. And sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should never underestimate. 2 Wish Scene 17 characters.